So the neuroscience of flow is such that there are things that get turned on in your brain. There are things that get turned off. So the peak performance hormones that get turned on, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. And because of that, we experience euphoria, motivation, peak performance, those moments when we exceed ourselves, and then this like tremendous sense of happiness. Now, here's what gets turned off in the brain when you're in flow: your inner critic and your fight or flight response. And that's why people find flow so liberating, because literally they feel fearless and uninhibited.
Hi, welcome to the Growth Mixtape Podcast, and I'm your host, Bob Mathers. We have one rule here. We're going to chase our curiosity way outside our comfort zones. The more uncomfortable and awkward, the better. We're going to talk to people you've never heard of doing jobs you didn't know existed. We're going to hear human stories about the things that connect us, what we can learn from one another, and what we can take away to apply to our own lives. These conversations might not seem to have a lot in common at first, but just like songs on a mixtape, can create something memorable and emotional. Today I talked to Diane Allen, an author and speaker that helps people find and keep their flow state. Now, if you're wondering what flow is exactly, you're not alone. In fact, Diane didn't know it was a thing either until one day she lost it. She shares the story of being on stage as a violinist, and she froze. She couldn't play. It was that humiliation that sent her on a quest to understand what had happened. Now, if you're like me, you probably didn't know there was a word for the flow state. I heard it for the first time maybe a year ago. But I know you've felt it, those moments where time seems to stand still, your creative juices are flowing, and you're getting more done in 20 minutes than you have in a week. And to me, it always seemed like magic. I never knew when or how it would strike. But it turns out you can control it and conjure it whenever you want. Diane takes us through the science of the flow state and a 3-step process for managing it. I love this idea, and I'm obsessed with figuring it out. Just imagine what more we could do. Please enjoy Diane Allen. Welcome, Diane Allen, to the show. I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you so much. I've been really looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, as I've been reflecting and preparing for this, honestly, I don't know if there's been a conversation recently that I've been looking forward to as much as this one. And I'll tell you why. I've been thinking a lot lately about different topics, and a lot of them will come up with guests on this podcast, but two in particular, this idea of purpose and the idea of creativity. And I've been thinking about how these things might be related and how I can get closer to them in my work and my relationships, etc. But as I've been soaking on this idea of flow, I guess it never occurred to me that this might be the missing piece that connects some of these different ideas that I've been delving into. And so we'll talk about that today. So no pressure, but I'm really expecting this conversation to solve most of my life's problems.
Oh, yeah, I think we can do that.
So yes, let's talk about that. But first, I'm always really curious to learn about the journey that got you here, and in particular, being a violinist. It's such a foreign kind of world and experience to how I live my life normally. So can you tell me a little bit about how that happened? What age did you know this was something you wanted to do?
Well, it's like nothing glamorous about it. I grew up in a day and age when you got to high school and they started talking about college. I knew that, okay, sure, I can go to college, but I could also get married. I didn't feel like there was a lot of pressure on me to have a career from my parents. So when I was like looking around thinking, well, I've got this violin thing going. It seems the most enjoyable. It seems like I've liked it the most. So why don't I just do this? It was like pretty much that. It wasn't anything glamorous.
I love your story about this idea of flow, or how you found it, because honestly, I don't ever remember this being a thing. I was in a book club maybe a year or so ago. It was a post-pandemic thing. And the book was Limitless by a guy named Jim Quick, and it covered a bunch of different things. But one of the chapters was on flow. And it's the first time I heard it described. And more importantly, the idea that it was something that I could actually control, because up until that point, when Jim describes it, I'm like, oh yeah, I've been in the zone. I think I've found flow before, but it always seemed like magic or something that just kind of happened that I had no control over. So let's start with,
Right.
yeah, exactly. Let's start with maybe how you found flow, or how you came across this topic that you spent so much time on.
It's hard to pinpoint. I would imagine that, if we do go back to my childhood upbringing, why did I choose violin? Maybe it was because it was so enjoyable. Maybe it was because when I was in a concert or in an orchestra or, doing the different musical activities that I would lose sense of time and a sense of self. These are key indicators that we're in the flow state. Those moments when ideas and insights come in from out of the blue, right? Things come together with the sense of ease. Maybe, if you're practicing real hard on a passage, and you're trying to get your fingers to do the right thing, and then all of a sudden you're in a concert and it just snaps together. Like you got this sense of ease. There's a negative feedback loop where you have to kind of force yourself and use willpower and discipline to do things. But when you're in flow, that it's so rewarding that the more you get into it, the more you get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like a musician's version of getting into flow is getting into the music. Right now, what is today? Well, it's just 3 days after the 5-year anniversary of my TEDx talk. How I got that TEDx talk was I started filling out applications and I came up with this phrase, get into your life like a musician gets into the music. And every time I put that into a TEDx application, I got an interview. So I knew I struck on something. And so the how of that is actually getting into your flow state. What does it look like when you're working on an Excel spreadsheet? What does it look like when you're want to play your best pickleball game? Who knows what, right? Maybe you want to rock outside of your comfort zone. So flow helps you, set you up for all of that. But we have high moments, we have low moments, right? We have moments when we're under extreme pressure and we rock and it's exhilarating. And you're like, how can I do that over and over and over again? That's what I did. I tried to figure out. I was in a situation very late in my career. I had gone through the school training, right? I went to New York City. I'm a New York City trained violinist. I'm not a prodigy. I'm a hardworking person who really worked hard at playing the violin. And when I would take auditions, some of them I would just completely crumble. And some of them, I would have these magical moments where everything just was way better than in the practice room. And I didn't know it was called anything. Like most people, it's like, what? There's a name for that? And what happened was I became the lead violinist of an orchestra, the concertmaster. And I was performing a lot of concerts. Getting into flow actually became routine. Like you sit in the chair and it would just happen. Still at this point, I didn't have a name for it until the day I couldn't get into the music. It was at a cultural outreach concert. I was leading it. We're at a rural community hall, 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon. There's nothing for me to be nervous about at all. And I gave the pre-concert lecture, had a great time, literally turned around, sat down, gave a big cue for the music to start. And my elbows were frozen, which was very strange. That's never happened before. Like they were just completely unable to move. And I knew that I had some sort of stress hormone dump into my system. And I thought, okay, there's nothing for me to do but to, have a neutral mind and let those stress hormones dissipate. And once that episode was over, it took maybe a minute, right, for me to regain the full use of my arms. Not a big deal. But right after that, I could not get into the music, and it freaked me out. It was embarrassing. I wasn't at my best. All eyes were on me, right? I wasn't the only musician there, but I was the lead violinist, and I had the melody, right? Not good. So that was the night I sat down and reverse engineered. Okay, how do I get into this optimal state of mind? And it wasn't until the TEDx talk when I was pushed to create the content, to really pull things together, that a friend of mine said, Diane, you are talking about the flow state, aren't you? And I think most people don't realize there's a name for those moments.
You've hit on a few things. So you lose a sense of time and a sense of self. And you've also mentioned it's kind of a positive feedback loop.
Yeah, let me go through that. So I think we all know what losing a sense of time is like, and it's usually because we just love what we're doing. Losing sense of self is a weird thing to say. Like, what does that even mean, right? So the neuroscience of flow is such that there are things that get turned on in your brain. There are things that get turned off. So the peak performance hormones that get turned on are anandamide, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. And because of that, we experience euphoria, motivation, peak performance, those moments when we exceed ourselves, and then this like tremendous sense of happiness. Now, here's what gets turned off in the brain when you're in flow: your inner critic and your fight or flight response. And that's why people find flow so liberating, because literally they feel fearless and uninhibited. When you have that inner critic turned off, all kinds of things come in. A lot of people experience flow out in nature when ideas just come in. A shower moment, right? We've all had shower moments where ideas come in, and then if you don't stop and drop and write them, they disappear. That theoretically is not flow state. It feels like flow state, but for some reason, showers also turn off the prefrontal cortex. So our inner critic is turned off when we're in showers and ideas have a moment to come in. So it's just a way for you to realize, okay, that's like flow-like. How many times, Bob, have you gotten more done in 30 minutes than you had in the last 3 days? Right?
Yeah.
Every time I say that, the whole room like chuckles, because we've all experienced that. And it's like, what is that? How did that happen, right? How can you make that happen, right? So the more you get into it, the more you get out of it. The more you get out of it, the more you get into it. You get into this positive feedback loop. But the second part about the positive feedback loop is the impact on the mental health. So Adam Grant, he's an organizational psychologist who, during the pandemic, he wrote an article in the New York Times and he gave a TED Talk on this very topic. And he talked about the mental health spectrum and how halfway between depression and flourishing, there's this midway point where you're fine, but you're not fine. You're focused, but you can't get motivated. You're just kind of blah. And the word for that is languishing. And so according to Adam Grant, the antidote to go from languishing to flourishing is to get into your flow state.
Hey, it's Bob, and I'm taking the Growth Mixtape on the road in a series of keynote speeches inspired by the stories of my amazing guests. At their core, these signature talks are about how to get you and your teams off autopilot and stop settling for small incremental improvements. This isn't going to come from spewing business advice. My podcast is full of people that have done incredible things, and every one of them struggles with self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and the crippling fear of judgment that holds so many of us back. They've also found ways through it by rediscovering their creativity, their curiosity, and the confidence to do scary things. Imagine the power of bringing these vulnerable stories to life, live and on stage, to help you and your teams hit your targets, find your voice, and be the rock stars you are. Book me for your next event at bobmathers.ca. Now back to the show. Yeah, I love that. In fact, oddly enough, I just wrote a LinkedIn post last week about flourishing and calling back to that Adam Grant. It was an Adam Grant article, really impactful. It gave words to what millions of us were feeling, right, in this state that we were in during the lockdown. And I love what you said there. You've also mentioned that we're sort of hardwired for this.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because it seems like, I know when we're in it, it seems effortless, but it takes a lot of awareness, I guess, to recognize what it is, what's happening internally and externally when it's happening, and to be able to conjure it on demand. So how do we create this thing that just seems to pop up when we're least expecting it?
Yeah. Now we're going to get to the juice of it all. Let's go back to that night when I was humiliated after that concert, right? I'm sitting on the couch, like really like, okay, how do I do this? And it ended up with 3 questions. Now the questions seem simple. The 3 questions are where, what, and why. And so flow falls under the umbrella of positive psychology. Positive psychology is all about taking a look at what's working well, reverse engineering that so you can create more of that goodness in your life. So Martin Seligman, he's the first psychologist to coin the term flow. And he described this moment when, people were so immersed in what they were doing, so deep focus, immersion, right? And being in their signature strengths. Okay. So just kind of think of that for a second. Then we have another psychologist, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is his name. And he's the psychologist who did the most extensive research into flow. And his definition of flow is an optimal state of mind when you feel your best and you perform your best. I like to describe it as when your genius and your heart become one. Go with the flow is a mindset, but being in your flow state is a mind state. Okay. So if we're going to look at how do we get into flow, and we're going to use that positive psychology model where we look at what's working well and we reverse engineer it, the very first step is you have to remember a time when you were in flow. That's the first time. That's the first place. And it helps to remember a time when you were really into it. Like the stronger the memory, the easier it is to analyze it. Okay. So think of a time when you were in flow, and then you want to ask yourself, the first question is just locate, where are you? That's the first question. Where are you? Okay. So for me, it was on stage. Where is it for you, Bob? Can you think of a time when you were in flow?
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier, and I was thinking about this morning. The most obvious example is when I'm out walking in nature by myself.
Okay, that's where you are. Now, second question, super easy. It's what are you doing? Okay, I'm on stage. That means I'm either speaking to an audience or performing violin, right? You're on out in nature. What you're doing is walking. Okay, so on the outside, what you're doing is walking. But what are you doing on the inside? So the second question of what are you doing has 2 parts. What are you doing on the outside? What are you doing on the inside? So for example, I'm on stage. What I'm doing is playing the violin. What I'm doing on the inside, this is what I figured out that night when I was sitting on the couch. I was like, okay, what is it? And I realized it feels like, my friends would say, well, we're creating the music, which I totally get that. You're not going to hear the music until it's played. But really, for me, it feels like sharing. It's like I'm sharing the message and I'm sharing the experience. And I realized, you know what? I did that. I was so lucky. My son let me read out loud to him until he was 13 years old. And it felt the same. I was sharing the message and sharing the experience. So when you are out for a walk, what you're doing is walking. That's what you're doing on the outside. What are you doing on the inside?
Sometimes I'm not really doing much of anything, but oftentimes I'll have, for example, this morning, I'm like, okay, I'm going to kind of reflect on this podcast with Diane. I've done a bunch of research and I've got questions, etc. But I just really want to go put myself in this space. So I would describe it as putting an intention out there. I don't hold on to it too tightly. I don't sit there and go, okay, I'm going to go on this hour and a half walk and I'm going to think about Diane and what this podcast is. I just sort of loosely put it out there. And then I try to pay attention to the birds and listen, look at the trees. And that's usually how it gets started. But I think it's largely because I'm not trying too hard. There's something there about that.
Yeah. Okay. And then why? Last question is why. And we've heard this question a zillion times. Let me go back to mine. So where I am is on stage. What I'm doing on the outside is playing the violin. What I'm doing on the inside is I am sharing. Now we get to the last question. Why is it so meaningful to share? And so what I realize is that music unifies us, and unity, that touches me to the core. There have been concerts when, especially audience sing-alongs, you've got the choir behind the orchestra, you've got a giant audience, lights are up, everybody's combined together in the music, and unity just will bring out the tears. Like, it just strikes me really strongly. So unity is why it's so meaningful for me. So why is it so meaningful for you?
This specific example, I think it's because I want to be present, and I want to create something meaningful for you, for me, and for the people listening. I feel this responsibility to do something magical with the time we've got together, if that doesn't sound a little too lofty.
Creating meaning.
Right.
Yeah. Using your signature strengths. For you, you described setting an intention as a signature strength. That's just something that you do. A lot of people have in trouble with that, right? But for me, sharing, the way I share, that's like a signature strength. And then that meaningful piece, right, for me is unity. So, why would you want to create meaningfulness for other people? What does that bring?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What's so compelling for you about creating meaning for other people?
There's something there about this elusive idea of purpose that I think I'm trying to uncover. And maybe it is a part of unity and connection that is related to my purpose that I'm trying to uncover.
So it's purpose is more compelling, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah. So your why could be, fulfilling on a purpose.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, so a couple of things that come to mind. One is, as I was on my walk this morning, I was trying to think about, what other examples or when else can I think of times when I've been in this flow state? It does happen when I'm running, which is just a faster version of walking. But it also happens when I'm playing guitar. And I thought, okay, but it doesn't always happen. So I thought about, it kind of happens most often when I'm on the deck at the cottage, on the water, by myself. But it doesn't often happen when in other situations, which made me do a little digging. And I realized that the one thing that is common to all of these different things is a lack of distraction. Because I often said, I've never come up with a single good idea sitting at my computer. And so I wonder if this idea of distraction is core to this as well. Because for me personally, I've discovered, I think, that it's the main reason why I do lots of great stuff in front of my computer, but I can't access that creativity.
That's why I made this door hanger. It says, "Do not disturb. I'm in my flow."
Yeah, I could use one of those. Because
interruptions are the number one killer of flow. And if we're talking about the workplace, we are talking about interruptions. You brought up so many different things. So let's just talk about, interruptions are the number one killer of flow. So managing interruptions, sometimes it is dealing with the external, but sometimes it's you interrupting yourself, right? We have these devices called, smartphones these days, right? We can interrupt ourselves all the time. I'll just put this out here. 90 minutes is a great arc of time.
So there's a couple of things that I love about that, Diane. So one is that, this block that I've got of not really being able to come up with amazing ideas sitting at my computer. Make no mistake, that's a problem. Like, my clients they're not like, okay, well, why don't you give me a call in 2 hours when you go for a walk and come back and we'll talk about these ideas. Like, it's important for me to access this in real time. So if you looked at my desk, it's a mess. So the distractions are all around me. So that's something I can do a better job at. I've also realized that sometimes I take my phone with me because I want to be able to speak into my phone and capture these ideas. But every time I pick up my phone, there have been times where there's 100 things that I could look at and get distracted by. And all of a sudden my walk's half over because I'm updating LinkedIn or I'm doing something, right? So I'm going to start carrying a notepad around on my walks instead of, or maybe a separate device like a dictaphone or whatever. I don't know if anybody even knows what those things are anymore, but these are great things that I've come up with, because I think if I can come up with a smarter way of accessing that flow when I'm out on my own, I can bring that back and get better at doing it in this environment where I remove distractions, I close everything off, I time block things.
You know what else, Bob? Can you tell that I'm at a stand-up desk?
No, not really.
Okay, I'll walk backwards. Like I am free. And I'm wondering if you can create an environment where you can actually be able to move around.
So I love that. When I used to have a real office in an office building, the walls to my office were glass, and people used to comment, like when I was on the phone, I was walking around the office all the time, pacing back and forth on a speakerphone. And I've completely lost that ability as I sit my ass in this chair for 9 hours a day. So that's an awesome idea. I hadn't thought of that. Or I could just I could also get a better Bluetooth headset and maybe walk around. But damn, that's a great idea too. Yeah.
You need to get off your bum.
Yes, I do. So we've talked about flow and how to access it. How does it, in your words, kind of help unlock your genius and love what you do?
Yeah. So the love part is just being in purpose, right? And I think that if you're self-employed, reconnecting with your own purpose is really, really important. If you're working for an organization, of course, they're going to have their own mission statement and values. And yes, remind yourself of those. But where are you in that? Like, what is your personal thing that you bring, the personal purpose that you bring? There's something about defining it. I know Brene Brown talks about this. When you can define things, they become more real. And I like to say, like, when you can define it, then you own it. You can conjure it up. You can remember, and it comes in, and it usually you feel it in your heart space because there are 40,000 neurons in your heart. And when you're in a sense of purpose, that energy gets exuded. According to the Heart Math Institute, the electromagnetic field of the heart reaches out 60% greater than the brain. So it literally reaches out 3 feet around you, and everybody around you senses your energy. And that sense of purpose is a great way to ignite those neurons in your heart. And then when people feel that around you, like it's literally the energy of enthusiasm. And enthusiasm's contagious. So that's why I like to call that, flow is being in your flow in front of other people, like, leading yourself first to get into your purpose and your why and your signature strength, right? That thing that makes you tick, that secret sauce that you have, right? When you lead yourself to be in that space, it inspires other people. And that's why I like to say that flow is the energy of influence.
Yeah, the energy of influence. I think we've all been in rooms with people where that's that indescribable quality of wanting to follow them and some sort of magnetism that it just seems you don't see it in the other 20 people in the room. There's like, man, there's something about her or him that you want to follow.
Yes.
The other thing that I like that occurs to me as I was hearing you talking, Diane, is that, when we're in that sense of flow, I wonder if it's almost kind of, you mentioned it before, we're hardwired for this, but maybe it's, if we can pay attention to it, it's sort of some sort of part of our subconscious mind that's trying to point us in the right direction. Like, pay attention to this feeling and what you're doing right now, because this is the way you were meant to live. And it seems oddly, I don't know, dysfunctional that we have to work so hard to find it. It feels like this is the way we should be living, but we've got distractions and all these other things that have sort of made it difficult. And so we have to be intentional about it. But you also mentioned making it routine. So if we can get better at it, maybe it starts to happen without us having to work so hard.
There's a stigma about it. Work is supposed to be hard. You're supposed to sacrifice, right? When you're working in flow, it is joyful and you're doing your best work. It's why, Olympians at the competitions do their best. They go beyond, right? You'll see a lot of people exceed their potential. Why not you? Right? Why not?
Yeah. The one you also mentioned something else, Diane, I wanted to come back to this. So when I described when I find myself in flow, I am always alone. And you've also talked about how to create this sense of flow in collaboration, in teams, when working with others. So you can talk a little bit about how that works, because that part of it feels pretty foreign to me.
Right. So, we have to backtrack for a second. We talked about, okay, figuring out your own unique way of getting into flow. Okay, now you got a strategy for how you get into flow. If we talk about that 90-minute block, you're going to sit down and you're going to get organized before you start your 90 minutes. And the first thing you're going to do is remember what your flow strategy is. Leadership always starts with self-leadership. You have to lead yourself to get into your flow state first. And then you have, like I said, I'm going to hold up the picture of the orchestra with me. If you imagine there's a 3-foot circle around me, all of the people in my 3-foot circle, they're going to start to feel the we call it passion when we're getting into the music, right? But, they're going to feel that energy that I'm exuding. I'm not exuding it on purpose. It's that electromagnetic field of just being in that state. Everyone's going to sense that. And the other thing about Heart Math Institute is that the people around you sync up, and then now they're exuding 3-foot circles. So this is basically the energetics of creating a ripple effect. I was at a concert once, a long time ago. For those of you who remember Bobby McFerrin at Carnegie Hall in New York City, the concert went really late. Afterwards, I'm down in the subways. Usually the subways at that time of night, there aren't too many people around. But because the concert just let out, there were a lot of people down there who, had just been in the concert. So many people were bright and cheerful and happy and singing. And there was you could tell that these were the people that were in the audience. One person on stage reached thousands of people, changed their mood.
It's funny, just because it's top of mind. So we happen to be talking at a time when a string, I think, of 5 shows that Taylor Swift is playing in Toronto, which is, I live on the outskirts of Toronto. And so we were talking about this as parents of some of our kids that are going or trying to get tickets, etc. And if you look at the math of this, it's got like $800 to get a hotel room. The tickets are hundreds of dollars. You're going to be sitting in the third bowl, a half a kilometer away from Taylor. You're going to be watching her on the big screen. And yet when you talk to people that are there, it's like, it's a transformative experience. There's no math equation that's going to explain the fact that your son or daughter is going to remember this night for the rest of their lives because of that energy. And if those people let out and go into the subway in Toronto, it's going to be the best subway ride of everyone's life.
Yep. Think about, we all have a friend who has something like a passion. Maybe they love Friday night is pizza night, and they don't order pizza. They make their own. And they talk about it all week. They can't wait to do the pizza, right? Pizza night, woohoo, Friday pizza night, right? And one time they invite you over, and you're not too into pizza or making pizza, but you get there and look at that. You get completely enrolled.
Yeah.
It's fun. You realize how fun it is.
That's awesome. So just to wrap up, I'm curious, so it's funny, we scheduled this, I think, conversation 2 months ago because you've been so busy. You launched your book tour. We're going to put links to the show notes about how people can pick up the book and go to your website. You've got amazing resources there on a lot of the things we talked about. So it's been really busy. I'd love to hear, what are you most excited about next?
What am I most excited about next? Wow, I haven't been asked that in a long time. we have different phases in when, I'm self-employed, and right now I'm in a sales phase. And what excites me about that is, and what I'm selling is I'm booking speaking engagements, right? And what keeps me going is just knowing, like what we just described, the number of people that I can share this with and help them to, unlock themselves. And I never answered the question about unlocking your genius, but I think that it's, like what we said, when we feel our best and perform our best, right? It's when you do unlock your potential. And just having that opportunity to do that is just, keeps me going.
Yeah, this conversation, like I said, at the beginning, I was hoping, I had high expectations, which can be dangerous, but you've given me so many things to think about. And as I alluded to earlier, I've often realized as we were talking that of course I find flow with clients and people all the time, right? These meetings that you come out of, it's like, oh my God, that was incredible. What was it about that? And again, it seems like magic, just like these ideas that I come up with on my own, on my walks, that I never would have come up with anywhere else. And you've given me some great ways to kind of reflect on all of these things and to be able to integrate, to make this more of a routine, not as much magic and not sporadic and have to be so intentional about it, but things that I'm sure, I got to believe, will just become more natural and easy to access because I've just spent more time being intentional about it. I love that.
I think, another way to summarize it would be to prioritize getting into flow.
Yes.
To recognize its value, to understand your unique way of getting to flow. Is there a right way or a wrong way? No. What's right is what works for you. I just provide enough information to get people started, but it's enough usually for people to have the kinds of insights that you've had. And then to realize, you know what? I need to put that door hanger up, right? And not have people interrupt me.
Mm-hmm.
I need to not interrupt myself, right? I need to create habits that allow me to get into flow.
And I think I will get a standing desk.
Yes.
I will spend more time on my feet. Yeah, Dan, this has been amazing. Honestly, it's I've come away with so many things that I'm excited to dig into, to soak on and build into my life. So thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Thank you.
The Growth Mixtape podcast with Bob Mathers is produced by Bespoke Projects. Music by Je m'appelle Walter Cronkite. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to follow and rate us. When you do this, it helps to raise our podcast profile so that more people can find us. If you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn using the link in the show notes.